I was dragged through the corridor, past the chewed up double doors, and thrown into the middle of Fairfax Street. On my knees, I begged them for my life.
The cobblestones battered me. I tried to get free, but every time I found my feet, I was yanked back to the ground.
From the parish, my Negro soul is a compass southward, it beckons me. My hands dipped in holy water, running through trees and tickets, thorn wounds, healing, rushing, by cotton fields, slave quarters, by mansions. I see it down the street. I wake up one morning and with my black eye, Alexandria is reanimated, smoke from chimneys, newspaper boys, and travelers, a step away from D.C., an auction block where I deliver a poem, a jar of soil, in a repository where blood becomes water, the ocean.
The trip was a pilgrimage to Alabama, specifically to really enlighten and affirm the history of racial terror and to deliver the soil from Alexandria to really commemorate the Alexandria's two known lynching victims, Thomas and McCoy.
I also think it was the gathering of two groups, the theater department and the Black Student Union, who might not necessarily always get together and do projects together, but were brought together by Mr. Shabazz and myself. And it has been a nice journey to see these two groups work with each other for the greater good.
Well, it was a tremendous collaborative effort between community stakeholders, the Alexandria Community Remembrance Project, Ms. Jones, who is, really spearheaded the theater department's contributions, as well as myself as the Black Student Union coordinator. And it was a labor of love that was extremely intense, but one of the most rewarding things that I've ever done for myself personally, and certainly for the students here at Alexandria City High School.
And so we cannot keep that knowledge that we have inside of us. We have to let it be seen to the broad masses. And so I'm hoping that our students can take what they have learned, turn it into an artistic creation. And there's many different ways to be creative. And not only learn the history, but then perform the history, play the history, write about the history, teach about the history, learn about the history, and share that history.
Of all of our studies, history is best qualified to reward our research. So students being able to go on this trip really allowed them to sort of see a firsthand account of the history of racial terror and oppression, but also of the resilience of African Americans in this country to, despite all that they have experienced, to continue to fight back and to fight for freedom, justice, and equality for all marginalized and oppressed peoples here in these United States.
I go down to Montgomery holding my best friend's hand, and my sister cries as the roots climb up her arms, but she is power, she knows this. Hands clasped, talking to God, walking on the street, watching the Potomac waters, knowing before we know and dying before we live.
I like to think of life as like, you know, where you are now compared to where you were in the past is a game changer. Everything that you do in the present is so important. And looking at yourself now and you think about where you were in the past, you could tell you've clearly changed. And going to Alabama, I would have never imagined it would be so life transforming because we were blinded by this truth for years. We weren't taught about, you know, these lynchings, it's like this oppression, this hate for our people, because schools decided that they wanted to hide it from us. They wanted us to stay away from something so tragic, so that way we could continue living our lives, you know, without knowing that truth. But thanks to this trip, we were able to dive in to see how it all happened, and I can truly say that we've all transformed from going on this trip.
You'll see the people who are success stories. You'll see the people who have a lot of money. You will see these people who are thriving in life, but you know it's an exception to the rule, and it's not the rule. So, kind of just learning like, okay, like how can I learn to be the exception, but like how can I also make room for more exceptions with the African American experience?
It was definitely a culture shock, not just for the non-African Americans, but also ourselves. And when you really think about it, it's like we see all these things and we kind of get a feel for how the Africans from West Africa came over to Alabama and, you know, having to go through, you know, all this hatred and oppression and having to go to the museums and seeing how they laid out how it went down during those years. It was a really big game changer for not only myself, but I'm sure for others as well.
The illusion of colorblindness, although it's something that affects, the mindsets of usually people who do not experience racism, it gets to all of us. We live in a liberal city, so we think it wasn't here, but we learn about these stories of Joseph McCoy and Benjamin Thomas, and we realize it was. And that the survival of people here is bent on years of perseverance and history of people that we may not know the names of at the same level that we know some of the figures like MLK that we see in Alabama. But these are people that allowed us to be where we are today.
Seeing those images was definitely the biggest thing for me, especially at the Civil Rights Museum when they had the picture like the trigger warning, like if you press on this you will see pictures of slaves being hung, and like I wanted to see it, so I pressed it. It's like, wow, like it's very triggering. Like you don't want to watch it, but you can't look away, almost that type of thing. So it did live up, but it exceeded my expectations because it didn't take the form I thought it was going to take, but it took a form that I think it needed to take.
There are so many people that I personally know, so many people that I've seen throughout my life and throughout my community around me that have like gone through these experiences, and it's just like I didn't really know the extent of which it like really like covers, and I feel like that's something that really all of us had experienced. We didn't really know the full like extent, and it goes further than the museums. It goes further than the experiences that have been told us. There's so many untold experiences and untold stories that we will possibly never know.
When we go to these places, we're seeing like what people want us to know. Mm-hmm. Like when we learn about things like slavery and racism in the history books, we're learning like what's gonna make them happy, but what's gonna let us know this quote unquote truth. When we go to these places, like the place we went to in Alabama, we're seeing like the full thing. We're not seeing like anything with restrictions or, we're seeing what they want. We're seeing like what actually happened. We're seeing the full extent of it. We're not just seeing what's acceptable to be put in a history book. So it kind of makes you think like, why? Like, what made you feel like you needed to hide this? Because if you were so like, oh, the past does not define us, then you would have been okay with putting the history books in here, that stuff in the history books, because you're not like that. But instead you choose to keep it from us.
It really just shows that so much of our history, it's not told in our schools. It's not told in, it's just that we go through so much in our day-to-day lives, and yet we fully don't even know the extent of what we've gone through in the past. And that was something that I really reckoned with me throughout this experience.
You know, it's puzzling because if you feel like it's not, if it does not define you, own up to it. Because you should be able to look at yourself and deal with the mistakes. But then they're not dealing with their mistakes because they it's not a mistake. It's just something that we were able to dismantle, but they're still trying to prove it.
We need to prepare the youth for what's to come. And the youth is so important because they're the next leaders of our country. We were in the same position as them. We need to stop what's going on now so that they can have a better future as well. And going on this trip made me realize that there's a lot of misconception with how these things are going on and how they're being kept in the dark. And I just want to make it clear that not only should we be educating ourselves, but we should be educating others.
Although anger and rage and all of this is never going to go away, the importance that we should put on Black joy, Black happiness, really, it just really amplified this like small spark in me of wanting to necessarily help my community and really just like outreach Black joy, either whether it be through creative projects, as Yanni was saying with her play, or through my own directing experience, or anyone else's just like their passions. And I feel like these experiences only help us really obtain these things, and it really helps us to, just as I said before, building a sense of community, building a network for us to expand upon and really connect upon in the future. Because after this experiences, we can't really just, we all have a bond. We can't really just like get away from this. And having this bond in the future is going to help us so much in our adult careers, in our college experience. And that connects with our other question necessarily saying about that we should have waited until college. No, this is the perfect time now, because now is the time to build our connections. Now is the time to build our community that has been destroyed years and years and years ago.
I sit in Montgomery, Alabama, and my body is not mine. My ancestors have taken it as a vessel, looked upon the land from my eyes, taken my hands together and held me with only myself, with my sister, my brother. My brother looks at me. He tells me, "This is home." And I cannot believe him. I say, home is far from here. But my ancestors even shake their head and tell me, home is where we live, where we survive, where the strings of two worlds have made the culture, the struggle, the survival. Listen to your brother not by blood but by soul, your brother who sings the song of our people.
I knew it was going to be hard, obviously with the whole memorial, and I read stuff about it previously. And we had meetings talking about this is going to be intense. But then you actually get there and then you see everything. Oh, it's so much, it's so different from someone telling you it's going to be intense and you feeling, I didn't think I would be so emotional during this trip.
I was wondering, before the reflections, reflections we had, I was wondering, if this is, I just can't imagine how this is for other people. Because I'm already, I can barely handle, the information I'm taking in. I wanted to put it to the side, and I didn't want to think about it, because that's, what your first, initial reaction is when you, see, horrible, horrifying things. But I knew I needed to pick it up and to actually think about it, because this is something that's still happening, and it doesn't matter if it doesn't affect me. It affects people I love and people I care about.
Well, yeah, it was a lot of rage because like when you see the pictures, it shocks you. You know, like even like obviously it is about race, but even like when you take race out of the equation, like you kind of just think to yourself like, how could you do these to people? We're supposed to be the land of the free. We're supposed to be the country who gives people the liberty to do what they want. And when you see these pictures, like you kind of just like, how could you do this to people? How could you say this but do this?
I was so overwhelmed by it all that I couldn't get words out. And so I kind of just like had to experience it and feel it.
So they gave us a little notepad throughout, and a lot of what I was doing was trying to reflect on it through writing while simultaneously running out of words. You know, at a certain depth of emotion, there's nothing that can be said. And at another depth, everything must be said, and oftentimes these things exist between a line of each other.
It feels like yesterday that we went on the trip, and I don't know honestly, but that trip will forever just replay itself.
I knew things were not exactly what I had in my mind. I knew we were going to be visiting sites and Edmund Pettus Bridge, but the museums themselves did things in a way to not only tell this story, but to get across the emotions that you should feel when learning about this. They were so well put together, and I could see it, not just feel it for myself, but I could see it through the students, their reactions to the exhibits. When we went to the EJI and we were walking through the outside, it's one thing, like I said, seeing this stuff online, but when you're actually walking and you can't see the end of the rows of the pillars, and each of these pillars is a different county with names on them. So it's not each one is a name, each one has tons of names. And then talking with the students and looking, it's like, you can't even read the names on that one because it's up high and there's so many names that the font has to be so small. Like those things finally get across. It's like, and that's a county in a state. It's not a state, it's not the country, it's a county. Like seeing all those things, and there's no end to these things. There's hundreds of them.
When the floor inclines and the pillars go from standing on the floor to hanging, I think it was sad, but sad doesn't seem like the right word. But standing there in Montgomery, Alabama, looking at pillars of names hanging from the ceiling, and then at the people surrounding me and thinking of ancestry, I don't have a specific adjective.
I was looking at the walls and where you see that there's the different some of the reasons of why these people were killed, and then you see that that families were killed, and that even infants were killed. Genuinely so many people were murdered for little things. One of them was black man says hi to white woman, and that's just ridiculous and genuinely heartbreaking. I just felt I needed to lay down when I was walking around, because I was just so upset, because it's really upsetting to see so many people have been just murdered. with no regard to their humanity.
We were literally talking with some people in the hotel room about how traumatic it was, reading the text in the museum, especially the Legacy Museum. That was a big game changer when we all came back from the hotel.
What I'm feeling right now is, in spite of everything that we literally witnessed in Montgomery and in Selma, all of the different people that we studied and read about, on the walls or listened to, in spite of my people, African Americans, we're still here, we're still thriving, we still show up every day.
After this trip, I went home. We got home at maybe 12 or 1 in the morning. I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about everything that we was going through. I just could not close my eyes. But one thing's for sure is that my whole mentality has changed and my perspective on life has changed. Seeing all those museums and all the statues and paintings, just seeing how creative our people were, and just being able to embrace that fact was a shock.
I agree. I think for me, one of the most impactful experiences was going to that art gallery at the end and seeing what people have formed out of all of this heavy trauma, especially down there. Because here, we masquerade that history a lot more than what you can do in Montgomery, Alabama, because that's sort of intrinsically connected. And it is here too. And I guess that's sort of what I came out of this trip thinking of.
It's good that we had those moments, because life is life. We need those moments where we're not stressed about college, rents, or our families. We need those moments to just kind of just while out. We had all those dumb moments in our hotels where we talked about nothing, we were laughing nonstop. And it's really funny because we would see people on this trip, we didn't think they would talk at all. I was so you talking to them? Why? So it's nice that we had that.
We couldn't have done this alone. None of us could have gotten through this and kept our wits alone. Because it is such heavy trauma after heavy trauma, lynching museum after lynching museum after, just reflecting and seeing names upon names. It was incredibly heavy. I do think that this trip made me really, and I think it was because of who I was with as well, and not just the Black people, but just in general, love being African American. Because to go down there and to see how many communities are surviving and thriving, and the art and the culture that has resulted from this horrible history, and all the perseverance and the love that emerges from these communities and this dark, horrible history, and how we made it through. But to be with people I know in a context like this, we are all so united, in this life and especially in this history, and to have these discussions and just reflect on things like that, it made me realize how much worth there is in staying true to the African American story as well as the African one. That we legitimately have a culture and a, worthwhile place in this country. Because as horrible as what we learned was, and as tragic and just traumatic, and how much anger and sorrow and rage and just depression that it really invokes, it makes you realize that we survived that. We collectively came together and survived and continue to. And as I said, you can never let this country take your spirit, because it will try. It will try. And they have been trying for many, many, many years. But we're still here, And being with such phenomenal people and knowing that we're all going through this experience together, and that if the future of the country looks something like this, and if we can learn from things like this, there's a reason to keep fighting. My life comes and goes with respiration, a mask over my face, this city, remembering the days before you could say Black Lives Matter without pale hands piling over your skin, your lips, remembering when a mother looked another mother in the eyes at a school board meeting and told her, I am scared my children will die by your children, and the other said, I am scared my children will die by your children and those that should have saved them. Remembering D.C. after dark when Breonna was killed, when George was killed, when they hung sign after sign for body after body. Who will be lynched tomorrow? Which soul will be placed on an auction block when natural hair makes us livestock? Where an officer in the 1980s placed a gun to my mother's head for being innocent, for having blood, for breathing. America, am I, is my father, my mother, my people, a stranger?
I stood on this rock when I was 11 years old, right here on this old ragged cement. You see, this is the last piece of the original cement where we left from on what is now known as Bloody Sunday, March 7th, 1965. We gathered right here. I followed John Lewis and Hosea right out through there, up to that bridge to be beaten by law enforcement officers. You're standing on historic ground. Are you a history maker?
I'm a history maker.
They didn't hear you.
I'm a history maker.
You better be. Hold it down. You sure better be. And I'm proud you picked up my rock. Because I know you're a history maker without you even opening your mouth. And even though he didn't grow up with a black grandmama, you're gonna do all right. Because our children just need to know where we've been. And they won't make the same mistakes that we made. They'll take us even further.
That's right.
You're the ones. You're the ones we've been waiting for. Now don't forget that.
Whenever you go through something deep and you see the trauma of a people yearning to be free, I think that this was something that really brought both the theater department and the Black Student Union and the community together. I think that we experiencing this as a school community partnership really, I think, created a collective consciousness where now we are all focused on what we can do to leave this community better than where we found it. And again, of all of our studies, history is best qualified to remind us of the things that we should avoid. What happened with the two lynching victims, Thomas and McCoy, should never be replicated. And we can only ensure that that does not happen again if we are focused on the causes, which is again stamping out racism, which is not a mental quirk or a psychological flaw, but a systemic oppression of a people.
What I've done so far after this experience is I've kind of just been rekindling my relationship with my community around me, and I've been focusing more on my own personal experiences with joy and kind of not constantly being angry. Honestly, I feel like for a lot of my life, I was angry because I couldn't really put what I've experienced into words. And now that I can do that, I feel like I can focus a lot more on how I can benefit my community instead of how my community has been hurt.
Like I said, I've been writing a lot, and I've been reading a lot as well. My favorite things over the past few months have been Black literature. I've gotten different books, different sort of textbooks, to try to educate myself on different things like African practices before Christianity, and like Harlem Renaissance, Black poetry.
The more research I uncover, the more I think to myself, like, why didn't I know about this? And, I try to educate other people and educate myself on, how, even the small things I do, how can I make them bigger?
I've seen many of the students affirmed and are a lot more vocal, both in and out of class.
Yes.
And that is to be commended because they have been able to use this experience to really give them the confidence to speak out for things that they believe in.
It also made us reflect about what's going on in our own departments, BSU and theater department, of what we're doing well, what we're doing okay, what can we do to improve. And so, with the help of our students, things have to change.
For me, it really does come down to the arts. I would love to do something that can be spread a little bit easier. I think that's what's harder for me. That's why I'm glad, I think with video, that really is the format. I tend to do poetry and plays, which I love, but I think there is a bit of a gap there with accessibility. I would love to connect more directly to it. With BSU, I am doing a Black Arts Showcase. I'm Vice President BSU. I'm helping organize stuff for that, which will absolutely include, the legacy of lynching.
I have used this particular trip and pilgrimage as a jumping off point to really involve students to be able to share the narratives that in their experiences on the trip. So I've used it as really important instructional methods, and I think that the students have really enjoyed it because they get to learn from their peers, and that's not something that they often get to do in a classroom setting where their peers have really had these firsthand accounts of this really powerful history that, to be frank, I don't think that we really spend enough time focusing on.
Your school system is no different from all the school systems around this country, not just the South, around this country. Now, what we need collectively is the system to be revamped, to be inclusive to everyone. Not, we may have, African Americans may have a few pages, maybe even some books are a chapter. But where's the Latino history? Where's the Native American history except for the bad part? When they take the land and run the people off, right? Where's that in your book? We want to do something with this area. You see that equipment right there? Over 200 children live in here, and that's what they have to play on. Yeah, we have 110 summers. When do they play on it in the summertime? I want a real playground. I know that's right. With walking trails and signage. So when I asked who Hosea was, they would know. Your children would know. We're gonna make a foot soldiers park. You can keep that rock or you can throw it down. If you keep that rock and take it back to Virginia, I need you to put it where you can see it. Where you can see it every day. Because when you see injustice committed against anyone in the whole rainbow of humanity, and you feel like you can't do anything, go pick up that rock and hold it in your hand and take from it the strength of the ordinary people who stood on that rock and made history that not only changed this hick town, but America. And then get up off your behinds and do something.
Divinities murmuring over my Negro soul, the compass quivering the line. At the end of a speech I wrote the first time, this land whispered to me, "You wouldn't know but you were there. I wouldn't know, but I was there.